I'd like to talk about the no input mixing board and how I approach it as a standalone instrument. The no input mixing board is a mixing board that has been patched such that the outputs and the inputs are connected in order to create feedback loops, similar to when you have a microphone that you hold too close to a speaker. With the mixing board, we have opportunities to shape and route the sound between the channels of the mixing board to very intentionally produce a variety of noises and rhythms and tones in a very musical fashion. Coming into this video, I'm assuming just a little bit of knowledge about the mixing board and about no input mixing. I hope that you're familiar with the different parts of the mixing board, such as EQs, preamps, sends, the general ways that a mixing board works. The way that I approach the mixing board uses a lot of the ideas from synthesis with things like oscillators, filters. This video will probably be the most accessible if you have a little bit of knowledge about the basics of synthesis. Finally, I hope that this is not your first no input mixing board tutorial. I think it could work that way, but there are a lot of great resources that already exist here on YouTube for getting started with no input mixing. So I would like to consider this as something more like a second video that can explain some specific techniques that might not be documented elsewhere. That being said, I do think it's important to talk a little bit about safety with the no input mixing board, or any type of feedback mixing. You want to protect your ears, your speakers, and any equipment that you're using. First, I don't plug my speakers or my headphones directly into the device. In order to reach the levels of self-oscillation that you need in order to drive the mixer into a sound-producing territory, it gets quite loud inside the box. So running that through something that can attenuate the sound, or ideally put a limiter on it, is a great way to keep your equipment safe. I record using a Zoom H5, which has a built-in limiter, and that has worked really, really well for me. Second, try and move slowly with your knobs and keep one hand close to the main volume, because you can always cut all volume to the machine by taking the main mix all the way down. So this is my mixing board, completely unpatched. It's a Mackie 1202 VLZ. It has 12 channels. 4 of them are mono channels with preamps and low cut. 4 of them are stereo channels, which counts for the other 8 in total. 2 channels on each of those other 4. For each channel, we have an EQ with high, mid, and low, a 3-band EQ, as well as panning, mute, and 2 auxiliary sends, which come out here and here on the mixing board. These aux sends are one of the key ways that we flexibly route sound through the mixing board in order to create a variety of feedback patterns and loops. When I'm approaching the mixing board, I like to think about this thing not as a singular spaghetti of feedback, but instead as a set of composable objects that can be routed into each other. So let's start out with one of the most basic patches that we can do, which is to take one of our auxiliary sends and run it into a channel. Turning up my volume, we don't have any sound yet because we haven't created any feedback. Right now, the channel is relatively silent, and that's what we're listening to, and nothing is coming out of the aux send into the channel. Now, as we turn up the auxiliary send, we're sending this channel out of the send and back into the channel here. And that will create a tone. At this point, it's a rather low tone, but we can start to shape that. Both the pitch and to a degree the timbre using the EQ section that we have here. One thing that's important to note with the mixing board that's a little bit counterintuitive is that when we increase the gain on the channel, we lower the pitch of the oscillator that we've created. We're driving it lower and lower through further amplification. So on these channels with the preamp, we have two more tools that we don't have on our other channels, which are great for these basic patches. We have additional gain that we can do through the preamp. Which works the same as any of the other ways that we're driving the gain on the channel louder. And then we also have this low cut, which pulls back the low end of the signal, and as we send the signal back into itself, this can create some really interesting sounds. First, notice how we get two related tones, harmonically related tones, I mean, with the low cut. We get this really nice these two really nice related tones with the low cut button. When the low cut is engaged and we drive the oscillator into sub-audio rates, we get some pretty funny sounds. So this is about as much as that we can do with a single channel on the mixing board. Lucky for us, we have a lot of other channels. So the next thing that I'm going to do is just route the other aux send into channel 2 here. One thing that's important to note with the aux sends is that we have two different types of auxiliary sends that different mixers might have. These are pre-fader and post-fader auxiliary sends. Aux 2, which we were using for our first, is a post-fader auxiliary send. So the amount of signal that we're sending out of the aux send and into our channel is based on how loud our channel is, which means that we can never, what it means is that volume and the volume that we're listening to the feedback loop and the amount of drive that we're putting into the feedback loop are related to each other. They are entangled. However, with a pre-fader send, the amount of signal that we are sending out of the aux send and into the channel is determined purely by the send knob and has nothing to do with the volume that we're listening at. And what this means is that we can create a more stable tone. On the Mackie mixer, the aux 2 is always going to be a post-fader send, but the aux 1 has a switch that lets us go between pre and post fade. I almost always keep it in pre-fader. Let's listen to that. So, opening the channel. No matter what volume we set it at, we maintain a sound. This is where things start to get really interesting with the way that we can combine sounds and work with these channels using a pre-fader aux send. What happens if we start to run these two channels into each other? Another option that we have with a mixing board like the Mackie 1202 is channel inserts, which give us the option to do direct outs. This is another means of getting an effect similar to the pre-fader send that we have with our aux channel. On the back of our mixer, we have a couple of additional outputs here, and these are all really important. We have two control room outputs, which are a set of outs that run through the source matrix, which I'll talk about later. We have alt outputs, which whenever we mute something, we don't actually mute it, we instead route it out of these alternate outputs here. And then we have 4 channel inserts. These are great. These are meant to send signals from the channel out to some sort of outboard gear, like a reverb or a compressor or whatever you want on that particular channel, and then run it back into the same channel using the tip and the ring of a TRS cable. Now, one thing that the manual for the mixing board describes is that if we take this channel and we only plug in to the first click there, you can see that this can go in all the way, but instead we only run into the first click with just a TS, a tip sleeve cable like this. We get a direct out from this channel that does not interrupt the signal flow of the channel itself, which means that when we run this back into itself, we can now decouple the pitch of the channel from the volume that we're listening to it at. I'm going to patch up another one into just the first click, and one more. But let's listen now. Beautiful. We have multiple oscillators. We can make chords. We can adjust those chords. The other options that we have on the back here that I talked about are the alt channels. I'm going to run one of those in here, and the control room outs. I'm going to run one of those there, just so we have a bit of space between them. So now we have our 3 oscillators here. I'm going to mute them all. We cannot hear anything. But right now, these are muted from the main outs, but they're actually running to the 3-4 alt outputs on the back here. So if we take one of those and we listen to channel 5 here, all 3 of these outputs are running here. Now, one thing that's really nice with these that I haven't talked about too much yet is distortion. One of my favorite sounds on the mixing board is to take several of these channels, run them together, and then the distortion that you get as you move past unity and overload the channel is really nice, especially with the further options that we have on the EQ here. Over here, we have the source matrix and the control room phones output. What this does is It takes some combination of sources, the main mix, the alt-3-4, and the tape, and it runs them out the control room outputs on the back. We're listening to one of those on this channel here. Let me. We can get some really nice distortion just by taking that same signal that we're hearing and running it out another channel and then shaping that channel. So right now, just to trace the flow of the signal, we have 3 oscillators. Each of these, blue, yellow, black, is its own feedback loop that's creating a tone. Those 3 tones are all being muted, so they go out the 3-4 outputs, which we could hear on this channel. But the 3-4 outputs are also, via the source matrix, coming out the control room outputs, running into this channel here, using the volume there. One of my favorite tricks using the source matrix is to take these tape outputs up here. I have little red-white RCA cables here, and I'm gonna patch them, the tape outputs to the tape inputs, which doesn't actually do anything until we engage the tape here as a feedback loop. The tape outputs listen to the same thing as main output, and the tape inputs route only to the tape source matrix here. But if we take that and assign it to our main mix, so now we're listening to the tape via the main mix, we can get some really nice distortion over this. Beautiful stuff. Now, this is one of those instances where having something like a limiter is really important, because we can boost this signal up to the point where we can pretty much destroy it, but we're not overloading the output that we're coming out because we're just running that straight into a limiter on our recording device. Already, this is a lot that we can do with the mixer. I'm going to just take something that we've seen before, take my aux 1 send, patch it into a channel here, and I'm going to start playing with this a little bit to show you some of the complexities of sound that we can get using our mixture of oscillator channels and complex routing that we have here. I hope that some of this information has been useful for improving an understanding of the no input mixing board. I've sort of just talked through, in general, some of the techniques that I use and how I approach compositionality and sort of modular subsystems on the mixing board. I think that I'm going to follow up this video with a couple of shorter, more focused videos on the principles of oscillators, noise channels, channel pinging, which is something that I haven't covered here yet. Really develop some of these ideas a little bit further. But I would love to get this out there with just an initial chat of how I approach this thing, and find out if there's any questions that anyone has to further develop this. Really happy to be able to share a little bit of what I've learned, and I hope you have a lot of fun with it.